Good morning, everyone. My name is Sujin, as introduced, and I'm working at UNESCO WHIPIC in the research office with Dr. Lee. And it's a great honor to be part of this really very important international forum. Following two very important presentations from Dr. Fu and Dr. Lee, I would like to introduce the outcomes of WHIPIC's 2 years research on sites of memory associated with recent conflict and suggest their expansive role in our contemporary society. First, we may have to understand what sites of memory associated with recent conflict are and their history to explore their contemporary roles. Back in 2018, the 42nd World Heritage Committee made a very significant decision to suspend the assessment of nomination application about heritage related to World War. They questioned whether such world-related heritage aligned with the purpose of the World Heritage Convention. And since then, one of the World Heritage Advisory Bodies, ICOMOS, and other heritage experts and institutions conducted research to evaluate the potential contribution of sites of memory to the implementation of the World Heritage Convention. And their findings actually indicated that sites of memory did not directly align with the convention's objectives and scope. And despite these results, the 44th World Heritage Committee decided to run an open-ended working group for sites of memory to accommodate other views on its potential. So in the following 2 years, the working group discussed how to approach sites of memory within the World Heritage Framework and their nomination processes. And as the outcome of the 9 times working group meetings, they produced the guiding principles for the preparation of nominations concerning sites of memory associated with recent conflicts. Adopted last year by the 45th World Heritage Committee, these guiding principles serve to define key terms such as conflict, recent, and sites of memory in very detail, and they also additionally outlined various conditions for using these guiding principles, including the utilization of criterion 6 and to become sites of memory and the establishment of an interpretation strategy for its nomination. Further, in case of any contestation between the nominating state parties and other state parties who may have different views on the same heritage, they set part for a mechanism to notify of any contestation between two state parties. Like this, these guiding principles are really meaningful as they underscore the importance of heritage interpretation through the establishment of interpretation strategies. So actually, since there is no direct mention on heritage interpretation in the World Heritage Convention, these guiding principles represent a milestone as arguably the first UNESCO document to address heritage interpretation approaches and its role in the World Heritage System. So as you can see here, this is the paragraph talk about the interpretation strategy. Although only one paragraph in the guiding principle discusses interpretation strategy, very briefly, I think, it shows that by lifting the moratorium on the assessment of nomination application related to sites of memory, this kind of heritage, sites of memory can contribute to UNESCO's peace-building mission, which means they can be part of World Heritage. So according to this part about interpretation strategy, interpretation should be multidimensional, and they have to talk about a full history of the site, and not only historical past, but also present-day meaning should be included in interpretation strategy. So, however, when considering the requirement to use criterion 6 as a condition for defining sites of memory according to the guiding principle, it raises a critical question: is criterion 6 essential for being sites of memory? I would like to argue there are some limitations in the guiding principles, and you may notice from the question that I raised that not only do sites have to meet the definition of the terms like conflict, recent, and cyto memory, but they also have to use criteria 6 to be cyto memory according to the guiding principles. However, using criteria 6 can be trickier compared to other World Heritage criteria because it needs to prove its significant intangible association through tangible links and very solid comparative analysis. Thus, nominating state parties who actually decide the outstanding universal value of the site can deliberately or not decide not to use criterion 6 and focus on other heritage values while neglecting its significant associated values. It means that they don't have to follow the guiding principles, and interpretation strategies are also necessary for their nomination. Then, in this situation, how can we get the most out of the guiding principle for heritage protection and peace building? To answer this question, WHIPIC explored the World Heritage List in 2022 to determine the number of sites of memory and understanding their features. As a result, we defined a total of 39 sites on the list, on the World Heritage List, which can be classified as sites of memory, regardless of which criteria they use for their inscription. And further, we try to categorize those 39 sites into 4 groups. And the first category encompasses sites that align with the concept of sites of memory as outlined in the guiding principles. These heritage sites are inscribed under criterion 6, and as you can see, take the largest portion among the other 3 categories. So, but in the remaining categories, although sites may not necessarily meet criterion 6 for their inscription, they are still connected to conflicts within their broader historical context, extending from the past to the present or even in the future. So this association with conflict actually qualifies them as sites of memory. For example, the case of sites of Japan's Meiji Industrial Revolution, which is introduced by Dr. Lee as well, is known for the continuous conflict between Japan and Korea over the interpretation of Korean forced workers' stories. This site is not actually inscribed under criterion 6, but it is clear that this site is a site of memory for Koreans because of that historical background. And Ululu-Katachita National Park in the third category can also be considered a site of memory. This site initially has been inscribed as a natural World Heritage Site in 1987. It has since then evolved to incorporate the values and significance of indigenous people who have lived there for over time. So with the growing recognition of indigenous rights and voices, the site has integrated an indigenous perspective into its World Heritage status. So through dialogue between local communities and the government, conflict between those two parties have been addressed, and which lead it to classified as a mixed World Heritage site, having both natural and cultural value altogether. So like this, despite the distinctions between these 4 categories, they share a common thread, which is that all of them have the potential for further conflict among stakeholders due to a differing perspective on heritage. And after studying 39 sites and their interpretations before, during, and after their inscription as World Heritage, we have identified 3 main findings. Firstly, there is a noticeable increase in the role of communities in heritage interpretation. Historically, state parties were often reluctant to nominate sites of memory due to their sensitive and very complicated nature. However, today, civic organizations and local communities are really vocal in influencing national and even international discourses, which actually support sites of memory appreciation and even inscription as World Heritage. This underscores the growing importance of communities as key stakeholders in heritage interpretation. And secondly, we argue that a monitoring system for heritage interpretation is necessary to prevent any conflict among stakeholders. Neglecting marginalized or negative narratives in heritage interpretation can exacerbate tensions as evidenced by our finding. So, therefore, implementing a monitoring system is crucial to address these kind of future conflictual issues. And lastly, it is really important to approach heritage interpretation in responsible and ethical ways. So embracing multiple narratives, memories, and values allows sites of memory to alleviate tensions arising from different perspectives. So by acknowledging and respecting diverse viewpoints, as I introduced earlier, heritage can foster understanding and reconciliation among stakeholders. So in addition to this research outcome, WHIPIC extended its investigation into sites of memory last year to identify its next step, like its future. And let's briefly review the evolution of the concept of sites of memory within the World Heritage system. Although heritage that can be called sites of memory have been on the World Heritage list since the early days of the World Heritage Convention, like the case of Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration and extermination camp, which is inscribed 1979, they have often been treated as very special cases. And their elimination assessment were even temporarily suspended in 2018, as I mentioned earlier. However, since the adoption of the guiding principle in 2023, sites of memory now have been acknowledged as very integral part of World Heritage. Moreover, based on the extensive case study we did last year, we have broadened the scope of sites of memory beyond the condition of using criterion 6. We have also observed that with active involvement from communities and monitoring system, sites of memory are no longer sources of any contentions or trouble. So based on all these findings, we try to look beyond the boundary of the World Heritage to see its next step. And as follow research last year, we conducted a comparative analysis of sites of memory both within and outside of the World Heritage List. Our objective was to identify any differences or similarities in their interpretation. So we examined a total 33 sites, approximately half of which were not included in the World Heritage List, while the remaining sites fell within the UNESCO realm, like World Heritage List or other UNESCO program like Memory of World. And this comparison allowed us to discern patterns and nuances in the interpretation of these sites of memory. So we identified the progression of sites of memory's role and its conflict management, as you can see here. This progress is actually based on the development of conflict management since associated event or incident happened in the past. When heritage sites are effectively managed through the stages of preservation, designation, exhibition, and extended research, solidarity and the succession of those values can be achieved. In other words, built upon earlier stages such as recognition, reflection, and commemoration about conflict, we can anticipate that sites of memory serve as repositories of history and also a catalyst for reconciliation, understanding, and social cohesion. Based on this relationship between the management of conflict memory and social role of heritage, we could get a hint on how to interpret sites of memory and their associated conflicts. When conflict management efforts are confined in the confined to the stage of limited recognition and acknowledgement, there is a risk of exacerbating tensions because of the marginalization of certain narratives. However, examples such as the Jovaren coal mine industry complex in Germany demonstrate that heritage value needs not to be restricted to its outstanding universal value as World Heritage. While this industrial complex was inscribed as World Heritage Site for its industrial achievement, it also incorporates narrative of forced labor, which allow the site for reflection on the past events and also commemoration of the forced workers suffering at the site. Similarly, sites like the Grünesbahn in Germany, which are associated with the tragic history of the national division during the war, go beyond their history of death and disconnection. They actually highlight their potential for preserving nature and fostering connection among people, culture, and nature for the future environment. These cases illustrate that approaches to interpreting sites of memory can evolve from mere memorialization and reflection on the past events to addressing our contemporary issues such as racism, climate change, or gender equality. Like this, sites of memory can serve as platforms for dialogue, reconciliation, and social changes by transcending their historical significance to become agent of positive transformation into the present and future. To conclude my presentation, in the past, sites associated with recent conflicts were often viewed as traumatic, painful, and challenging due to their troubled history. However, over the last 2 decades, a shift has occurred, and these sites have been increasingly recognized as difficult heritage or negative heritage, which signals a growing acknowledgement of their significance as very precious heritage. However, despite this recognition, their acceptance as heritage has remained difficult as implied by their names. But today, these sites have started to transform into sites of memory, serving as focal points for solidarity, reconciliation, and commemoration. Through their potential to contribute to peace building by ethical and responsible interpretation, they have earned their place as integral parts of our heritage as well. However, looking ahead, WHIPIC try to go beyond that role of sites of memory. So we anticipate that sites of memory will expand their role to become sites for future consciousness with ethical and participatory heritage interpretation. Our research over the last 2 years has affirmed their capacity to address global and ongoing contemporary issues, positioning them as platforms for envisioning a better future. While it is true that many sites of memory are still perceived as either difficult or sites of memory, depending on their interpretation or who interpret and how they are interpreted, it is really essential to recognize that sites of memory possesses the transformative power to bridge very painful past with constructive futures through interpretation. And this is the end of my presentation, and I'm truly grateful for the opportunity to discuss an important topic for World Heritage, as well as our future heritage and our future life together. Thank you once again. And